Welcome back, everyone, to the Parenting Lab. I am always so glad that you're here. We have had lots of new listeners over the past few weeks. So if you are one of those that has recently found us, I want to welcome you to the conversation. I hope you'll take a moment while you're here and leave a review so that we can reach every parent that is looking for support and healing and transformation, because we are all in this together. And I know I am still learning every single day right alongside you. And today's episode is no exception. And it's something that has come up a lot lately in my coaching sessions. So I'm excited to get to it. Today, let's talk about those moments in our relationships that cause us to react. Okay. So maybe it's the moment when something small happens, like your child is talking back or your partner says something in a tone that seems a little off. And before you even have time to think, you're ready to take it to the mat. Your tone sharpens, your body leans forward, you're in it. Like, let's go, I'm fired up. Or maybe it goes in a different direction. Maybe you're in the middle of a conversation and suddenly it's like you disappear a little. You're still there, but you're not fully there. Does that make sense? Your mind goes blank or you just want it to be over. Or maybe you find yourself saying yes when you don't mean to say yes, or agreeing with the other person or smoothing things over, trying to keep the peace. And then later you realize you never actually said what you felt. The other person feels fine, but you actually feel worse. And sometimes it just looks like staying busy. Maybe you're moving from one thing to the next, and not stopping long enough to really feel anything very deeply. Or maybe you tell yourself you'll deal with it later, but then later never really comes. We all have moments like this, and usually we explain them away in really simple ways. I'm just not the kind of person that you mess with. I don't handle conflict well. I shut down. I'm a people pleaser. And when we use labels like that, it's almost as if those responses are just part of who we are. But what if they aren't personality traits? What if they're actually patterns? What if instead of saying, this is just how I am, we started asking ourselves, what pattern is my system following right now that's there to keep me safe? Because underneath all of those reactions, the anger, the avoiding, the shutting down, the over-accommodating, there's something deeper happening. And that is that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's scanning for threat. It's pulling from past experiences and choosing a response that at some point in your life helped you stay safe. Not necessarily safe in a physical, like a life or death sort of a way, but safe in terms of connection and belonging and emotional survival. And it does all of that incredibly fast. Faster than your thoughts, faster than your intentions, faster than the version of you that wants to respond differently. All right. So today we are shining light on why that happens. We call these default stress responses, and I know that you've heard of them. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You may even identify with one of them already. But before we go any further, I want to be really, really clear about something. And this is really foundational to everything we're going to talk about today. And that is that this is not about labeling yourself. You are not a fight parent or a freeze person. These are not fixed traits or identities that define you. They are patterns that you learned, and patterns can change. So as you listen today, I don't want you trying to figure out which of these boxes you fit into, all right? I want you to get curious, to start noticing, where does my system tend to go when something feels hard or tense or uncertain? And maybe even more importantly, what might my system have learned at some point that made that response make sense? Because if we stop at just, this is how I am, we are missing the opportunity to understand what's actually informing our reactions. And it's that understanding, that awareness, that opens up a little bit more space and a little bit more choice for us in our responses. And it's not because the reactions disappear overnight, but instead it's because we start to see them while they're happening. And that changes how we show up, not just with our kids, but with our partners and honestly in every relationship we're in. So before we get into the mechanics of stress responses, I want to give you a simple lens to hold on to as you listen today, because it will help everything make more sense. All right. Your nervous system is not built for accuracy. It is built for efficiency. It's not pausing in the moment to carefully assess, is this actually dangerous? It's asking something much quicker and it's much more automatic. Does this feel familiar to something that's happened before? And if the answer is yes, even a little bit, even emotionally or subconsciously, it reacts. Not based on current reality, what's actually happening, but based on that stored information. The experiences you've had, the relationship dynamics you've been in, moments where something felt overwhelming or unsafe, unpredictable, or too much. Your system takes all of that and it creates patterns, pathways, shortcuts. It is literally wiring shortcuts between the stimulus and the response. So the next time something even resembles that earlier experience, it doesn't start from scratch. It doesn't slow down and gather new data. It just runs the old program because it's fast. And most of the time, you don't even know what's happening. You just feel the urge to react, to push back, to leave, to shut down, to smooth things over. And then later, maybe you look back and think, oh, why did I do that? That doesn't even make sense. But to your nervous system, it did. Because your system isn't tracking the moment the way your thinking brain is. It's tracking sensation and tone and energy and familiarity. Okay. This is why you might find yourself getting defensive in conversations that aren't actually threatening, or avoiding something important even when you want to engage, or you feel overwhelmed by something that logically you know you can handle. It's not random, it's patterned. And once you start to see that, you can then begin to recognize this isn't just me being difficult. This is my system doing something it learned to do. And from that place, we can start to understand the different directions that energy moves when the system detects stress, because it doesn't just react in one way. Energy tends to move in one of four directions, all right? Toward, away, against, or nowhere at all. And that's where we begin to understand these four responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, not as labels, but as strategies your system is using to navigate the world. All right. So let's start with the one that most of us recognize the quickest, and that's fight. Fight is the response most people think of first when they hear the word stress. It's the one that feels the most visible, the most intense, and it's probably the hardest to miss because the energy is moving outward. There's a sense of activation in the body. Your muscles tighten, your voice gets sharper, your thoughts speed up. You feel a pull to do something with that energy, to either correct or confront or push back against either resistance or pressure from the other person. This often shows up in really obvious ways: yelling, arguing, snapping, sometimes even physical, right? Like pushing or throwing things, slamming doors, violence. But more often, especially in parenting and relationships, it's a little more subtle than that. It's like a quick, harsh tone in our voice. It's a need to be right. It's interrupting instead of listening. It looks like control, right? Trying to manage the situation or the behavior or the outcome because something about it feels like it's getting out of hand. And underneath that is usually a sense of threat. And it's not a big dramatic threat. Most of the time, it's usually as simple as I'm not being respected. No one is listening to me. I'm losing control of this moment. And your system responds by directing that energy outward or against. We push back to regain stability, raising your voice to feel understood, or tightening your grip on the situation so it doesn't spiral out of hand. If you zoom out, it makes sense. Because at some point, your system learned that intensity worked, that being louder or stronger or more forceful either protected you or got your needs met or kept things from getting worse. And for many of us, this wasn't something we consciously chose. It was something we experienced. Maybe you grew up around anger or aggression, where control came through volume or pressure or force. And as a child, you felt what that did in your body. There was tension, and the way everything in you shifted to respond to it. So now, without even realizing it, your system reaches for that same energy, not because you want to create fear, but because somewhere along the way, your body learned that fear created control. And again, this happens incredibly fast before you've even had a chance to think, I don't actually want to respond this way. And this is where a lot of parents find themselves stuck in patterns that feel confusing. Why does this always turn into a power struggle? Why do I keep reacting bigger than the situation calls for? Not because you're choosing that consciously, but because your system learned that when something feels uncertain or out of control, it moves toward fight. So as you listen to this, you might ask yourself, when things feel tense or chaotic or emotionally charged, do I feel a pull to move against? Do I try to regain control through intensity, correction, or confrontation? And if I do, what might my system be trying to protect in those moments? All right? We're not judging it. We're just trying to understand it. It's information, right? Now let's look at another direction the system can go when stress shows up, where instead of energy moving against the other person, it actually starts to move away. And this is flight. Flight looks very different from fight, but it's driven by the same goal, and that's safety. In flight, the energy is moving away from discomfort, from tension, from anything that feels overwhelming or uncertain or emotionally charged. But this doesn't always look like physically leaving the room. In fact, most of the time, it actually can look like staying, but never really settling. Your mind speeds up. Your body feels restless. There's a sense that you should be doing something, fixing, solving, getting ahead of the problem before it gets worse. So you stay busy. You clean. You organize. You work. You scroll. You plan. You research. You move from one task to the next, telling yourself you'll come back to the hard thing later. But later keeps getting pushed further and further and further out. In conversations, this might look like changing the subject or deflecting with humor, or focusing on logistics instead of what's actually being felt. In parenting, this often looks like overfunctioning, trying to stay one step ahead of everyone's needs. You anticipate, you manage, you organize everything so that nothing falls apart. And on the outside, it looks like you have it all together because you're productive, you're responsible, you're on top of things. But internally, there's often a low-level sense of anxiety, a sense that slowing down that isn't really an option, because if you do, everything that you've been fending off might catch up with you. So your system keeps you moving. And again, if you zoom out, this makes sense. In this case, your system learned that distance created relief, that staying busy helped you avoid something that felt too big or too uncomfortable or too overwhelming to face head on. Maybe there wasn't space to process emotions. Maybe things felt unpredictable and being prepared gave you a sense of control. Maybe you learned that pausing meant feeling, and feeling wasn't safe. So now when something starts to feel intense, your system doesn't move toward it, it moves away. Not because you don't care or because you're avoiding on purpose, but because your body has learned that movement creates safety. And this can create its own kind of disconnection in our relationships, because while you're trying to manage the situation or solve the problem or keep things running smoothly, the other person might just be looking for presence, for you to just stay, to sit with them, to engage, even if it's uncomfortable. When that doesn't happen, it can feel like distance, even if you're physically right there. Now, if this is sounding familiar, you might ask yourself, why do I keep avoiding conversations I know are important? Why do I feel so uncomfortable slowing down? Why does it feel easier to do something than to feel something? What am I afraid of feeling? None of this means there's something wrong, just that your system has learned that when things get hard, it moves away. So as you listen, just notice, when stress shows up, do I feel a pull to leave, either physically or mentally or emotionally? Do I move into doing or fixing or staying busy instead of staying present? And what might my system be trying to help me avoid in those moments? Information, patterns. And once you start to recognize it, you're not just inside the pattern, you're actually observing it. And that gives you a little more room to choose differently over time. All right, now let's look at what happens when the system doesn't move against or away, but instead it shuts everything down. Now this is freeze. Freeze is often the one that people don't recognize right away because it doesn't look like action. It looks like nothing. But internally, it's not nothing at all. It's a full system shutdown. Instead of moving against or away, the energy drops to nothing. Your body might feel heavy, or still. Your mind goes blank. Words are harder to access. And often there's this feeling of, I don't know what to do. In the moment, it can feel like you've lost your footing. You're in a conversation and suddenly you can't find the words you want to say. Maybe you're trying to make a decision, but everything feels foggy or overwhelming. Something needs your attention, and instead of moving toward it, you don't move at all. From the outside, it looks like disengagement, like you don't care, like you're ignoring something, like you're choosing not to respond. But that is not what's happening at all. Your system isn't choosing in that moment, it's conserving. Because at some point, it learned that when something felt too big or too unpredictable, or like nothing you did would change the outcome, shutting down was the safest option. If fight didn't work, and if leaving wasn't possible, then the next best option was to go still, to disconnect, to wait it out, to reduce the intensity by reducing your engagement with it. And again, this happens incredibly fast. You don't think your way into freeze, you just find yourself there. And this can be especially confusing in our relationships because the impact doesn't always match the intention. Someone might be trying to talk with you or connect with you or work through something. And from your side, it feels like, I don't even know what to say right now. But from their side, it can feel like you've disappeared, like they've lost access to you in that moment, which can sometimes lead them to push harder, ask more questions, increase the intensity. And that often pushes your system further into shutdown. So you get into this loop where one person is reaching, the other person is retreating, and neither of you feels understood. This can also show up outside of our conversations. You might notice it in behaviors of procrastination or putting things off that matter to you, in feeling overwhelmed by something simple and not being able to start or get going. You can even find it in a kind of numbness, like when you're going through the motions but not feeling fully connected to what you're doing. And if you've ever told yourself, I just need to try harder, or why can't I just get it together? It's really worth pausing here because this is not about effort. It's about capacity. Your system has learned that when something crosses a certain threshold, it shuts things down to protect you from overload. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? You might begin to ask, what is feeling like too much right now? All right. Just like in the other responses, this one makes sense when it's in context. All right. It developed for a reason. It serves a purpose. The question isn't how to force yourself out of it, but how to begin recognizing when your system is moving in that direction so you can meet it with a little more awareness instead of frustration. All right. So try and notice, do I go blank in moments of stress? Do I feel stuck when I want to move forward? Do I disconnect when things feel overwhelming? And if you do, what might your system be trying to protect you from in those moments? Again, it's information, it's patterns. Because even here, even in stillness, your system is doing something very intentional. It's trying to keep you safe. And from there, we can build up more capacity over time. Okay, now there's one more direction the system can go when stress shows up. And this one often gets misunderstood. It's fawn. Fawn is the response that moves toward, but not from a place of grounded connection, from a place instead of protection. Instead of pushing back or pulling away or shutting down, your system instead tries to stay safe by keeping the relationship smooth, by reducing tension, by avoiding conflict, by making sure the other person is okay. And on the surface, it's easy to miss because it looks like kindness, like being agreeable and flexible and easygoing. It can look like being the one who keeps everything together, right? Being a peacemaker. But underneath, there's usually a different thing happening. You might notice yourself saying yes when you mean no, apologizing quickly, even when you're not sure what you did wrong or when you're not even sorry. Maybe it's softening your tone or minimizing your needs or blurring your boundaries just to keep things from escalating. You might find yourself tracking the other person's mood or adjusting in real time to keep things calm. But afterward, there's this quiet buildup of resentment or disconnection or even confusion about what you actually wanted in the first place. Because in that moment, your system made a decision. Connection is more important than authenticity. Harmony is safer than honesty. Okay, now again, let's take the long view here. This makes sense. At some point, your system learned that keeping other people happy kept you safe because maybe conflict felt unpredictable. Maybe someone else's emotions felt overwhelming or hard to navigate. Or maybe you learned that expressing your own needs led to disconnection or tension or rejection. So your system adapted. It learned to read the room, to anticipate and to accommodate, to move toward others in a way that minimized your risk. And just like in the other responses, this happens quickly. You don't sit there and consciously think, I'm going to abandon what I need right now. It just happens. And this one can be especially complex in parenting and relationships because there's a version of attunement that is healthy. We want to be responsive and aware and connected to the other person, but fawning isn't attunement. It's over accommodation. It's when your sense of safety becomes dependent on keeping the other person regulated or happy or calm. So instead of holding your boundaries, you soften them. Instead of staying grounded, you uproot yourself. And over time, that leads to feeling depleted or resentful or disconnected from your own needs. And it can also make it harder for others to experience you in a way that's both connected and steady. Now, if this feels true to you, I want you to consider, do I prioritize keeping the peace over being honest? Do I feel responsible for how others are feeling? And do I struggle to hold boundaries when other people are upset? If so, what might your system have learned about connection and safety? Because just like fight, flight, and freeze, this response developed for a reason. It helped you navigate something that felt hard or overwhelming at the time. The work now isn't to judge it or just to suddenly stop doing it. It's to begin seeing it, to recognize when your system is moving toward others in a way that leaves you behind. And from there, to slowly begin building the capacity to stay connected without losing yourself. Because real connection doesn't require you to disappear. You are allowed to be fully there. And when you start to understand that, you can relate to yourself and others very differently. Okay, now that we've walked through each of these responses, let's take a broader perspective, because this isn't just about understanding your patterns. It's about what happens when these patterns meet each other inside a relationship. All right, now this is where it starts to get really interesting because we don't experience those responses in isolation. We're experiencing them in relationships. And that means it's not just about your nervous system. It's about what happens when your pattern meets someone else's pattern in real time. Now, this is why the same type of moment can play out so differently depending on who you're with. You might feel really calm and steady in one relationship, but completely reactive in another. And it's not because you're inconsistent, it's because your nervous system is responding to what's in front of it, to the tone, the energy, and the way the other person's system is moving. So let's see how this can play out. All right. So imagine a moment where your child is overwhelmed. Their system is moving into freeze. They're shutting down or going quiet. Maybe they're avoiding eye contact. And as a parent, you're feeling that disconnection and you move into fight. Your voice gets sharper. You push for a response. Talk to me. What's wrong? Why aren't you answering me? So from a parent's perspective, you're trying to create clarity. But from a child's perspective, it feels like more pressure. So the child shuts down even more. And now both systems are reinforcing each other. I'm not safe. I'm not safe. Or maybe you have a flight response, meeting someone who wants presence. You move into problem solving, staying busy, trying to fix things really quickly, and the other person just wants you to slow down, to sit with them, or to just be with what's happening. They feel alone, even though you're right there. All right. So these patterns aren't random. They're predictable once you start to see them. And more importantly, they're workable. Because when you understand not just your own default responses, but also the responses of the people around you, you're able to interpret their behavior differently. So instead of seeing they're ignoring me or they're overreacting, they're being difficult, you start to see, their system is probably overwhelmed. Their system is trying to create safety. Their system is moving in the only way it knows how to do right now. This goes right along with the head, heart, and hands framework we talked about back in episode 47, if you want to go back and listen to that one again. Now, this doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. It means you understand it well enough to respond with more intention. Because if you don't have that awareness, it is very easy to take these moments personally, to escalate or withdraw, or just repeat the same patterns over and over again. But when you can pause, even just for a minute, a second, and recognize this isn't just about the situation, this is two nervous systems interacting, you have a different kind of access. and you can start to ask, what is actually needed here? All right. Now, that question doesn't come from instinct, it comes from awareness. And that's what starts to gradually change the pattern because you're not just reacting to what's happening, you're understanding where it comes from. So, what do we do with all of this? Because on its own, awareness can feel helpful, but it's also a little bit frustrating because you start to see your patterns, you recognize it, maybe the moment right after it happens, or maybe halfway through, but your system is still moving in the same way. Well, I want to offer you something here that's really important, and it's that the goal here is not to eliminate these responses. You're not going to become someone who never feels the urge to fight or flee or shut down or over accommodate. Those responses exist for a reason. They're protective and they're efficient, and often they're appropriate. If someone is hurting my child, I want to go into fight mode, right? The work isn't to get rid of them, it's to expand what is available to you alongside them, to create just a little bit more space between what you feel and what you do. And that starts with recognizing in real time, I'm getting activated right now. I'm starting to shut down. I'm about to say yes, but I don't mean it. Okay. That's the moment that matters. Because even if you don't change your response yet, you can gently widen your window. Now, sometimes that might look like pausing before you speak instead of reacting immediately, or saying, I need a second to think about this instead of shutting down completely, or noticing the urge to fix or leave and choosing to stay present for just a few more seconds. Maybe you'll catch yourself agreeing and then add, maybe I actually need to think about that. All right, these are small things, but they can change so much because they begin to teach your system something new. And with practice, you are creating new pathways, new shortcuts that literally rewire your system and how it processes information. This is how you move from automatic reaction to intentional response, all right? Not by overriding your system, but by working with it, by understanding what it's trying to do and slowly expanding what else is possible. And this is especially powerful in your relationships because when you can recognize your own response in the moment, you're also more able to recognize it in the other person. So as we close today, I don't want you to walk away feeling discouraged or trapped in a certain pattern, and I don't want you to feel like you have to fix all of this. I want you to walk away simply paying attention. Just notice. So when stress shows up this week, in a conversation or a moment with your child, or just even in your own internal experience, where does your energy go? Does it move against? Does it move away or nowhere or toward? And can you catch even a glimpse of it while it's happening? Because that awareness, even for a moment, is where something new begins. And maybe here's one more thing to hold on to as you move throughout your week. There is a tendency when we start to see these patterns to turn that awareness into self-criticism, to notice our reactions and immediately think, I should not be doing this by now. I know better than this. Why do I keep responding this way? But if these responses were learned, if they were built in moments where your nervous system was doing its best to navigate hard things, then it only makes sense that we have to replace that learning with new learning, new ways of doing things, new patterns. Because the goal isn't to become someone who never gets activated. It's to become someone who can recognize it and understand it and respond with a little bit more intention over time. And that doesn't just change how you feel internally. It changes how other people are able to experience you. Because as you begin to respond differently, even in the smallest ways, you're modeling something they may not have experienced before. And that's a person who can feel big things and still stay present. A partner who can get it wrong and come back and repair. And a parent who doesn't rely on fear or avoidance or over accommodation to create safety, but builds it moment by moment through awareness and intention. And that is how patterns begin to shift. It's not all at once, but just in small, consistent moments that start to look different over time. All right? So just start there. Pay attention, stay curious, and notice what your system is doing without rushing to change it. I hope this gives you something new to think about this week. I know that even as I was putting this episode together, it helped me see several places where I've slipped into old patterns. So there's work to be done here for all of us. We are all on this journey together. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I will see you all next week here in the Parenting Lab, where we will continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care.